Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Orto Foresta, the new market garden we're setting up here in Florence, south of Florence, but very close to the city. You can hear a little bit the road in the background. That's one of the main arteries into the city of Florence. We're not too close to the road, fortunately. We're surrounded by beautiful hills and we have the river next to our field, so we're separated by the road from the road by the river. So we've got a nice buffer zone, which is also a wildlife corridor. And yeah, as you'll see in a minute, this market garden is still in the making. There's a lot of work to do. There's been a lot of challenges we're facing, especially the soil we found, and you'll see it in the previous videos, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. But the soil we found was in a terrible state. Lots of material that had been brought here from construction work, and so there's lots and lots of stones, lots of rubble, sand, clay, mixture of things, only a little bit of silt, which is the original parent soil we should have here near the river. So there is fertile soil very low in the profile, but the very top, let's say the first 40 centimeters are full of terrible soil. We have bonified it, we have remediated it by removing all the previous plastic sheeting that the nurseries had left. We removed all of that. There was a bit of metal fencing in the soil and we removed all of that, so now the soil is just full of stones really, and then a mixture of things, and you'll see it in a minute. This has huge impacts on our work, but it's also a nice challenge, a nice demonstration site to show you how to regenerate any site, even starting from the worst of conditions. So I'm going to start by looking at the shed where we have the tools we brought from the UK and some new ones as well, and then we're going to move on to the market garden, and we're going to show you the agroforestry component of it, which is the skeleton of this market garden, and an element which is completely new compared to what we did at Living Soil Garden in the UK. Here we go. So here's the shed, and lots of tools. That gives you a clear impression of how little tools we need. Most of these we actually never use, like the hose. As you know, we do very little digging in our system and very little, weeding in our system. You'll see actually there are a lot of weeds, but very rarely this type of tool is effective in a deep mulch system. But we do use them every now and then. And then a lot of these tools are hand tools that can be considered fully manual. There's the zipper, there's a bulb planter, there's a transplanter, very useful one. In the UK, not very common, but actually I recommend you consider that in no-dig systems and also in sandy soils. And you can see some videos on our channel where we use it, but you can check it. It's called multi-planter, I think, but there are several versions of this kind of gun. Shotgun, not a shotgun, what do you call it, like cannon shaped, bazooka shaped transplanter. And then we have a wheel hoe. I recommend you check out Green Tools Tech, company of my friend Bruno, who's great tool maker and is developing interesting tools like this wheel hoe, which is cheaper than the alternatives and also a very nice design that I really recommend. And he's worked on a better version of this transplanter that you've seen us use in the UK as well, which is available on his website as well as a prototype. Here we have one of the few power tools. There's this strimmer, and then there's a lawn mower. We still don't have a flail mower. It's one of my the things I would like to get, but at some point we will. And we got two broad forks now. This one I'm really loving, by Easy Farm. It's designed by Matteo Mazzola and colleagues at Easy. Really nice design. You'll see us use it in following upcoming videos. And I'll also demonstrate, if I can, a comparison between the Blackberry Lane broad fork that most people use in the UK, which Perkins has popularized in Europe as well. This Easy Farm Bio Fork, as they call it, and then perhaps also Green Tools Tech or Bruno's broad fork, which is in very similar to the one that JM40A uses in Canada. And what else do we have in here? Obviously lots of irrigation bits and pieces. That's not very interesting. Two seeders. One is our Jang that we've used all the time and we still use mostly, and then that's the Earthway that's been lent to us by Andrea Battiata, whom I really thank, because he's been incredibly helpful with us lately and in our settling in Florence. And he's got a very nice market garden in the center of Florence called Orto, and he didn't use it very much. Now he's borrowing this from us and we're borrowing that from him, because this is useful for beans and bigger crops to sow directly. Then the knives. I'll show you the greenhouse at the end, but I'm going to go straight into the market garden, and you'll see one of the main challenges we've been facing here in the market garden By the way, I'm under an elm. English people are not so used to elms anymore. These are beautiful creatures. Dutch elm disease struck here as well, but now most trees are recovering and there's new ones popping up as well. So this was full of grass because we couldn't occultate. We couldn't put a silage tarp, a black plastic sheet on top to kill the weeds before starting. You've heard me say that millions of times. You cannot start an organic garden just with cardboard and compost. In most case scenarios, 99% of the time, you need to occultate, which means putting some black, impermeable, waterproof plastic, kill all the weeds and then start. We couldn't do that here. We didn't have the time, we didn't have the plastic, we had to get going. So we put compost without even cardboard on top of the original soil that had been ripped. It had been, the right word would be subsoiled, with a tool which is called a subsoiler or a ripper, which is a tool that just has a hook that drags, it gets dragged through the ground without inverting or no rotation involved, just no mixing on the soil, just aerating the soil. And the reason for that is that there were millions of stones, so we wanted to break the compaction, also move up a little bit of the stone so that we could remove it, and some of it has been used here for this raised bed that Flavia is using for edible flowers and pollinator plants. So lots of weeds. We have removed a lot of them by hand, so this carrot bed is actually clean. Here we have some peas, sugar snaps and mange tout. Sugar snaps in production now, beauties, little beauties, and climbing up this bamboo trellis. We're going to set up our usual type of trellis with posts and pastoral netting or livestock fencing soon, but we didn't have it so far. Under here there's a very interesting interplant of broccoli and turnips. There's broccoli here and the turnips in the middle, so there's 2 rows of broccoli 40 centimeters apart and 2 rows of turnips 20 centimeters apart. And you see a mulch of, oops, I've broken that broccoli plant, of grass clippings. Beautiful mulch. It keeps the soil cool in the summer, in the day, and keeps the moisture in, because it's light color, so it reflects the sunlight. Here you can see that there is a lot of weeds, tons of weeds, and I've been removing them with a strimmer mainly. There's no way that you can go in here by hand and remove all this couch grass. This really demonstrates why you need to occultate, to do that weeding preparation with the plastic. How do we fix this problem if we haven't done our homework properly and we ended up with a lot of weeds through our no-dig beds? There's several ways. I mean, obviously I showed you can weed by hand and keep doing it, but you have to do it a lot, and on, here there's 3,000 square meters. It's unfeasible. So another option is to harvest what you have. So here we had radishes in the weeds, lots of weeds, and then radishes in between. We harvested the radishes, which were good despite the weeds, and then we covered with this landscape fabric, burned some holes and planted courgettes, zucchini, and these are gonna produce a crop while killing the weeds. So it's a kind of win-win scenario, even though this type of plastic takes a lot longer to kill the weeds because it lets the water and the air through. And so actually when we remove it at the end of the cycle of the zucchini, of the courgettes, we will still find some weeds underneath, so it's not as effective, but at least we can grow something while killing the weeds. And then we'll probably have to tarp properly afterwards. What do we have here? Asian greens, going to flower now, they'll need mowing. Then here we have Sutton, which we brought from the UK, broad beans, dwarf broad beans. And we had a rocket in between, which we already harvested. Before we go to the agroforestry systems, I'm going to finish with the veg. What do we have here? We have true spinach, which is in production now, actually struggling because it's been raining, believe it or not, a lot compared to previous years here in Italy. And here's a trick: whenever you harvest, whenever you have poor germination of something, you can fill the gaps with some extra plants, so you have the soil covered and in production even if the germination was poor. Here you can see the weed pressure on this spinach bed, so we'll have to do something similar to what we did there with the zucchini, with the courgettes. Broad beans, and lots of fat hen as a weed. You can really see it here. The fat hen shows that the soil actually in this area is fertile, soil that is rich in organic matter and fertility, and we have it only in certain spots here in the garden. So those spots, if you have them on a larger property, those are the spots where you want to put your vegetable garden. And then we move on to this bed, which has got a nice interplanting. So the situation here is quite interesting. We had red Russian kale and beetroot, and you can still see some of the beetroot in between. You also see a lot of bindweed. Let me show you. This is bindweed here, Okay, we're not worried too much about bindweed. You just keep on top of it really, and or else do this with the courgettes, or with something similar like potatoes or squash. And so there was a big late frost, and it set back the red Russian kale and the beetroot. So I planted some lettuce because I saw that most of these things seemed dead. They recovered, and so now it's a very densely packed bed, and it looks really pretty. It's producing loads. Obviously the lettuces are a bit smaller than the ones that are on their own, and also they were a bit later, planted later. Red Russian kale though has recovered magnificently, because after the frost here we get really nice warm days, so plants can really catch up quickly if the frosts are not too repeated and not too severe. Here we have elephant garlic, lots of grass. Look at the couch grass there. But again, you know, keep watching us, because we'll really show you how to transform something that's gone wrong. And I keep saying this, I keep seeing people making this mistake, which is make no-dig beds on top of weedy pasture without occultating it first with tarp. If you do that mistake, you can still go back. And I've given you already a few ideas. If you keep watching our video tools, you'll see how this will be transformed, you know, into a clean garden, a bit like that bit looks at the moment. So elephant garlic and spinach planted in between, same thing as before. We have the lettuce and the red Russian kale and the beetroots in between. Here we have some rocket covered for flea beetle protection. See, doing nicely. The cricket is making a bit of noise in the background. Here we have more Sutton broad beans. I showed you this already. Let me go over here where there's more veg, and then we'll move on to the agroforestry rows. So over here we have some perpetual spinach and onions in between. Again, the idea here is whenever we harvest the perpetual spinach, the onions get a boost, a growth boost, a pulse, and that's down to these plants being able to mobilize a lot of carbohydrates to the rhizosphere, to the root zone, whenever they get cut or eaten. In our case, we're pruning them to sell them, and that also has the effect of improving the life of the neighboring plants and their production. Onions and French beans, dwarf French beans. Here we have celery in the middle, and also celery every now and then here. And then we have Salanova lettuce. Very dense planting. Celery usually is spaced a lot wider, but this is an experiment. Long carrots, normal Nantes type carrots, and these are the small Paris market carrots, the round ones. It's very stony ground, so I don't expect a very good crop of carrots the first year, but in time, as we remove the stones or they get pushed down or up by the worms, we will get better carrots, trust me. Celery, and then French beans on the side. Here lots of lettuce, and we're struggling to sell all this lettuce because we hadn't planned to have lettuce really at this time of the year, so we hadn't organized any outlets for it. At the moment we're selling mostly to our friend Andrea Battiato, who has boxes and restaurant clients, and he distributes this veg for us. But then we have to, very soon start to sell directly to the customers that we have to find. That's fine, because Florence should be a good market, but obviously we don't have enough variety to do many markets. We don't have enough quantity to sell to restaurants, so it's one of those periods in the growth of a business where you have to be very careful what you do to avoid wasting, ruining potential relationships with customers, but also avoiding wasting produce. So a very, very delicate balance there. You see the lettuce is doing amazing. This is Salanova, this is a mixture of things. Gilad, one of my favorite ones, mostly here. The green ones are Romaine, Quebec, and there's some Cantarics as well. Let's move on to another lot of vegetables, a block of beds. These blocks are 9 beds. See how much weeding there is to do there. You can't see the path. I had to go through here with a strimmer to be able to differentiate between the path and the bed. But don't worry, this is going to be fixed. Here we did a lot of hand weeding, but already the weeds are coming through, so you can see there'll be another, every 2 weeks we should be in here doing a bit of weeding. If it dries up enough, we can go here with a hoe and slow down the weeds that way. Otherwise, if it's wet, the hoe doesn't really do a great job, so we need to go on our knees by hand, the 4 of us. And that's Flavia, me, Irini, and Tessa are woofers, and remove the weeds by hand. That's a lot of work. It takes half a day to do 10 beds. Not the best solution. But again, if you take them if you pick them on time, if you don't let them get too big, it can make 10 times less work. Okay, so here we had another problem in this lot. So this is clean because there weren't many weeds here. Also because we've been using this compost, which is terrible for weeds and plants. And you can really see the growth of these plants is very stunted. Some of them have died. These were planted the same day as those, but they're nowhere as good. They're struggling, they're showing deficiencies, and even the weeds are really slow to grow in here. This kutch grass has just popped up, struggling to set roots in this stuff, which is a very bad municipal compost, which is incompletely decomposed, and so hydrophobic. The water doesn't really go in. It seems to stay dry even when it rains a lot, when we irrigate, and the plants can't get the water, then therefore can't get the nutrients, and therefore they die or struggle. You can really see it here. This is Cicoria Catalonia, chicory, and these lettuces, look, compared to the ones we had over there, they're planted on the same day or just a couple of days later, but they're not doing that well. So what we did in these beds is we added some of the good compost that we get somewhere else. It was a bit more expensive and a lot harder to work with because it's got a lot of bits of stones and charcoal, which is also good because in a way that's biochar, so it's a very good resource, but it's very hard work to move it around. And so here we added a little bit of that, then we mulched also with hay to keep the moisture in. And here there are beans, climbing beans, and on the sides there are spinach, which are popping up just now. And see a few seedlings popping up through the hay. So what's the situation here? We have 9 bed blocks, as I said. The middle block, which is this one, has got some willows growing in it, one every 2 meters. The idea is to train this as an espalier to become a support that replaces that sort of thing. And so we can grow beans, peas, tomatoes, whatever, cucumbers, everything that needs climbing in this central bed. Also, once the espalier structure is set, we can let one trunk, one shoot go up from the espalier and become a shading plant. So we get shade from that agroforestry row there, that other agroforestry row there, which is the boundaries of the 9 bed block, and then we get shade from the middle. So we have 4 bed blocks in a way with shading trees every 6 meters now, because instead of being a 9 bed block 12 meters apart, now it will be 4 beds, that's 6 meters, then another bed with trees, and then another 4 beds, which is another 6 meters. So here we see the effect, terrible dwarfing effect on the broccoli. Look at the phosphorus and nitrogen deficiency in these plants, and also the turnips. Despite the hay, despite the good compost, these guys are struggling because of the bad compost in them. And yeah, there's very little we can do. So we made some beds with good stuff, with good compost here, and we sowed spinach, lots of slugs at the moment because of the rain, and there's the river there, don't forget, so the slugs really come in through there. But some things are germinating. Here there are carrots germinating now, here there's rocket and radish, and this is radish, and you can really see under the flea beetle netting there, the sporadic germination, not very good, a bit erratic. Here, same terrible compost, and we decided to put some beans. Beans actually are going to suffer from that, but climbing French beans here. Actually, these are borlotti beans, and the others are climbing runner beans, the ones you saw near the willow. So the first year, the willow won't be enough to support those. We'll have to do something like this, or something like what we did in the UK. We haven't been able to set it up because I don't have a post banger yet. When we have, we'll put a fence structure there. So the beans for the first few years can climb up that, the trellis, and also that can serve as a training trellis for the willow espalier. And I think in 3 years we'll be able to not put any trellis up anymore and just use the willow for that, but perhaps even less than 3 years. Dwarf French beans, and here you see the red willow has been used instead of the white one. And what else? So let's move on to talking about agroforestry rows, which many of you will be interested in because this is a new element that wasn't present in our previous market garden. So here you see the first one, and again there are 9 bed blocks which are separated from each other by these agroforestry rows. And so I hope the light is decent on camera. And what do we have in this row? Fruit trees. In this row it's mainly apricots. You can see the apricot trees here. Now let me talk about trees a little bit. A lot of people in the UK are not used to doing this. When you get a bare-rooted plant, especially if you plant it in spring, but even in autumn, if it's a grafted plant, it is good practice to top it, to cut the top. Some people are even more ruthless, and actually that gives better plants in the long run. and they cut it really low. Here's the graft, and they would cut it there. If you cut it there, then you select the best. You can actually wait until you do this, before you do this, until you see some of the shoots, the buds opening. You select the best strong bud at the bottom, then you cut above it at an angle so the rain can run off. And then that one, you select it as a new trunk for the future years. And you usually tie it to a little bit of the trunk that you leave intact, just to allow for that tying. I'll show you that actually with the peach trees in a minute. But essentially what you can do is build the tree from scratch. That allows the root, the radical apparatus, the root part, the underground part of the plant to recover from the stress of the transplant and also develop, while the vegetative part is slowed down a bit. And in the long run, in 3 or 4 years, you get a much better plant that way than you'd get by leaving the tree as it is when you plant it in. What I did is, in these apricots, I've just gone for kind of an intermediate approach. I've cut them here, and I'm going to select the branches that will form the vase or the final shape. In the end, I'm selecting them at the end of this year. I'm going to do that work by looking at what shoots are more vigorous and they point in the right direction. So this we have here we have apricots. In between 2 apricots, which are 3 meters apart, so there's one, and here's another one. We have a series of things. We have a biomass shrub, which is this Elaeagnus umbellata, Japanese gumi, and then we have mulberry as a support tree. This will go very high and tall and become an umbrella that we can use for shade. Shading obviously the fruit trees, protecting them from hail and stuff like that. Goji berries, and that's it. So the main perennial pattern is apricot, Elaeagnus, mulberry in the middle, it goes tall as an emergent tree, then goji berries and apricots. And then we have all the annual perennial herbaceous plants which work as a placenta, just preparing the ground for these plants that I've just mentioned to be more, to have more nutrition and better soil available. And in this case, some of these are plants that produce, like the artichokes. We have some globe artichokes, 1 every meter. And then we have some perpetual spinach. And then we have some cover crops like peas and field beans. So those are going to be a placenta for this type of setting. Then some plants that we have replaced, every now and then, instead of the Elaeagnus and the goji berry, we have broom, which is a scoparius, and feijoa, which is this fruit. But essentially the same pattern then repeats over and over again. So this 3 meter unit with the apricots at the ends, and then 1 production shrub, which is the goji berry or the feijoa, and 1 a support shrub, which is the broom or the Elaeagnus. So let's move on to the second agroforestry row, which is the one that I was talking about with the peach trees. So here you can see the third approach to market gardening as we move towards the second agroforestry row. When you start a market garden, this is what you should do really: occultate first. If you manage to do that, I mean, there's a better approach, which is using cover crops, but you need a lot of time to do that. So if you have limited time, you have half a year to prepare, you can just tarp, and after tarping you make beds. So perennial weeds are slowed down or removed completely, and then you don't have the problem we had at the very beginning there. So this is what we're going to do here. I'm going to show you a fourth approach over there when we get there. So the second agroforestry row, here we have peach trees, and you can really see what I was saying earlier. Let's have a look here. These peach trees arrived and they had a lot of transplant stress. Imagine that bare root trees, when they are pulled up from the ground, they lose even half their roots in the ground, and then they're sold to you with only half of their roots, but all of the top of the plant. So that top part of the plant is not able, it cannot be sustained by the root apparatus because that's been halved. So you really need to do something, unless otherwise the plant suffers. These plants showed suffering even though I had done that topping, that cut like 50 centimeters from the ground. So I had to do another cut very, very low, and this finally produced some good shoots. And now this is what I was saying earlier, this is called technical cut. Sometimes I select the strongest shoot and I tie it here, and this will be my new trunk. And at the end of this year I can then use that when it's upright, and the next year I can select the first branches, and the third year I have a trained tree that can start to produce. And usually, believe it or not, these trees tend to produce better and earlier and much bigger crops and live a lot longer than the trees that you just get bare rooted, you plant in the ground and you don't do any cuts to them. It looks quite ruthless to do this, and it looks like it might slow things down a lot, but actually it doesn't, because the plant needs to focus on root development rather than foliage. So what's happening here? We have peach trees. Let me get to an area where the peach trees are a bit taller so you can see it. So you have peach, this one, and another peach was the other 3 meters away there, where there's the other cane. And in between we have Gleditsia triacanthus. This is a lovely nitrogen fixing tree, very spiny, very thorny. And then on the sides we have, here actually it's not here, we have either ribes, blackcurrant or whitecurrant, and raspberries. In fact, there should be one of these two, shouldn't be a fruit, but it should be Cornus sanguinea, dogwood, but they've all died. So in time we'll add some willow in here to replace it. But at the moment we have just more fruit. And then the herbaceous plants on the side are perpetual spinach, field beans. These are all going to be used for that root stimulation. We're going to cut them, lay them on the ground as a mulch, and also in doing so we're going to stimulate the plants nearby. So you can see raspberries, black currants, there's the willow I was saying, and then perpetual spinach, there's some maize or sweet corn as a placenta again, some peas, but these are all going to be used to support the system, not really as a crop. We might harvest the odd one, but the main purpose is to use them as a crop. And you can see here the weeds along the agroforestry rows are not a big deal because of the mulching. That's very heavy, so they're very easy usually to pull. You know, look at this Artemisia, which is a rhizomatous like couch grass. You can clean it up and leave it there as a mulch. If it's a dry day, it won't be a problem. Sometimes they will root again. That's not a problem. You're going to pull them again. A lot of maintenance, but a lot of biomass. You're using these plants to build your plants. Yeah, you're using plants to build soil, and that soil will help your plants. So it's using the soil as a bridge between the plants you don't want and the plants you do want, and that's a peach tree. That's what that one responded really well to the topping. At the end of this row, so let me go just over here. I've planted some sea buckthorn recently. Some of these actually are not black currants, and there's some gooseberries as well. So the gooseberry, raspberry, blackcurrant as soft fruit here. And every now and then, here you go, this is a sea buckthorn. So at this end we have sea buckthorns. At those ends I didn't show you, but we have some pomegranate. 3 pomegranate in the first agroforestry row and 3 on the second one. And then at the very end we have some feijoa, that Brazilian subtropical fruit that I showed you earlier. Cool. So here we got the third agroforestry row. This is plums and green gages, that sort of thing. Very vigorous. They're responding really well to the cuts and also to the transplant. And also here we have a very vigorous plant that is horseradish. Really amazing. One of the best reaction to the transplants we've done. It's really done incredibly well. We can already cut it to create some mulch on the sides. And the main purpose of this will be to use as a mulch. It's such a vigorous plant, very deep roots, so every time you cut it, it stimulates the ground and around. It digs deeper, brings nutrients up that you can bring on the surface and feed to your production plants, in this case the plums and the rest of the lot. And also it's really decompacting the soil underneath. It can give you a crop, but obviously horseradish doesn't sell that well in Italy. We can easily do with 10% of this being harvested and the rest being used as a support. So in between the plums, so that's both Japanese and European plums, what we have as an emergent tree is poplar. You don't see it here because it's been cut. We cut it low, so again we give it a bit more strength, and we sell, that also makes the trunk grow sideways. Secondary growth is a lot faster, so you get thicker stem and also much more vigorous root system. And then that's going to be our emergent support tree for shade and biomass. And then we have our support shrub, which is hazel, which will be trained as a shrub. The focus is really poor today, I don't know what's happening with my camera, forgive me for that. And then we have raspberries as a production shrub. So same thing here, poplar and hazelnut and raspberries, and the placenta, or the these plants that prepare the ground for more demanding crops, in this case are annual and biennial. We have perpetual spinach again and sweet corn. And obviously the horseradish is a perennial one that does the same job. Then we have sometimes, instead of the hazelnut, we have sambucus or elderberry. And I think that's it. Oh, instead of the raspberry, sometimes we have gooseberry. Apart from that, it's all the same story over and over again. Here you can see some of the better poplars. I'm doing a little bit better here. White poplar in this case, Populus alba. In the UK you can use hybrid poplars which grow really fast and they can really do this job. Actually this bed you can do everything we've done here, you could do it in the UK. The spacing might even stay the same, you know. Use horseradish, perpetual spinach, sweet corn, you might plant it a bit later than we did here, but you can use it as an annual biomass and a bit of harvesting from it as well. Sorry, I forgot to show you field beans and peas here used as a green manure, and you can cut them and bring them on the ground. They do nitrogen fixation. The plums will do fruit production, the raspberries will do the same, gooseberries the same. Poplar is your support, and you can use hybrid poplars or willow. So everything here, everything that you see here you can do in the UK exactly the same way. Here lots of weeds, we don't have enough plastic to cover it, so here we're going to strim it. That's going to add organic matter to the ground, mostly in the form of roots. I mean, the stuff that stays on the ground oxidizes and dries up, but the roots, every time you cut, some of the roots get self-pruned and also emit these carbohydrates in the rhizosphere, so this improves soil immensely. If you allow these plants to come up and flower and then you cut them down and you do that repeatedly, you're improving soil. And then at the end we'll have to put plastic on them because otherwise obviously they're weeds, so they're not really well behaved green manure as you would have if you had planted it. Here you see another approach to this sort of thing. Instead of tarping only, we put horse manure, a 15-20 centimeters layer of horse manure covered with black plastic, and that will save us applying compost in the autumn when we're going to have beds here, because this will have decomposed. This is fresh horse manure with a bit of bedding in it. We'll have decomposed, and essentially we don't need to add any compost. We can just plant into it. This is the syntropic agroforestry row designed with Gennaro Cardone. You've seen a little bit of this in previous videos. I'm going to do a video where I explain the planting scheme in these rows. That will be a video at the computer, so I know it's been long due. It's the third part of that series, yeah, hang on in there. Well, it will finally arrive. In the meantime, I'll show you the real life planting scheme. This is very dense because it's a syntropic planting. So every 25 centimeters there is a perennial plant. In this case there is kaki, persimmon as a fruit, and sometimes loquats. And these are actually heat-loving crops. You wouldn't necessarily plant these in the UK. They wouldn't produce fruit over there in that climate. They are 4 meters apart, so a bit wider as a planting scheme. In between, let's go in order, we have, so right after the first fruit tree, which is again persimmon, we have lavender, elderberry, trained as a shrub, lavender, red willow, sage, blackberries, the climbing or kind of crawling type, sage, white willow, which will be used as an emergent, that will go up and become our support emergent tree for shade, etc., etc. Sage, another red willow, sage, elderberry, lavender, and another fruit, and this pattern repeats. On the sides there is Jerusalem artichokes, which will be cut and cut and cut every time they flower to add some biomass. And every now and then there's you can see it there, every 1 meter, but actually most of them died, so we have to replant them. There is some globe artichokes, so very densely planted. And the idea here is that the blackberries, which are on either side of the white willow, will climb up the white willow when it's big enough, and also the red willows. So there will be like a form of trellis here with a bare trunk and 2 shrubby espaliers, and the blackberries can use those as a support. The elderberry will be the first shrub to be removed when the fruit trees are big enough, but in the meantime it can create a lot of biomass to mulch those trees without importing any material. Here you see that we use a lot of wood here, and this is a good principle. If you have a lot of wood in decomposition, we inherited this from the people who had the field earlier. They had left this pine trunks, logs rotting, but also you could have used anything that you prune. This is stuff we pruned, ailanthus or robinia, other stuff that we pruned, some acer. we prune them and we put them on the ground. The best thing to do then is to cover them with a mulch. Here we didn't do it yet, but cover them with mulch. So we'll use the weeds and the first prunings of these plants to cover the wood, so that now at the moment it's very wet because it's spongy and it's been raining a lot, and then that moisture can be conserved in the ground when you cover this with the mulch. Now in the UK you have a lot of slugs, so I wouldn't recommend this until the middle of the summer, and in fact you might not want to do this at all. But in hot climates, arid climates, dry climates, this is a very good system because you have a sponge and literally the roots of the plants will grow into the wood. You can see it here. Let me see. Yeah, you see the fungus breaking down this, and yes, there is grass growing into it, literally into the wood. As the fungus, in one hand, as the fungus breaks the wood down, the roots can get in. So isn't that great? So that's that, and then we move on to the last agroforestry row. So over here we have, you can actually see here too that there's a lot of grass there and there's a lot of grass there, and there it's covered now, and here there isn't because there was a lot of bamboo. Some of the bamboo is survived, but a lot of it we removed the rhizome of, and it's been moved there. There's a lot of bamboo and also Rhododendron, another cane plant over there, and we didn't want them here because we want to grow veg here, and also because there was a lot of metal fence tangled with their roots, so it didn't make any sense to leave it there, so we removed the whole lot. So this is what I call the English agroforestry row. It's species that are adapted to cold, and the management of this row will be such that you can essentially copy it in the UK with the due modifications, mutatis mutandis, the Romans said. And so what are the fruit trees? There's a mixture here, all the things you can grow in the UK. There's pear, there's apple, there is nashi, which is a kind of apple-pear cross type of thing. There's cherry trees, and there is a fig tree, and that's it. You could have put plums as well in the UK, but those are in a separate row here. So, and then we have, so in between two trees, let's say that cherry and this apple, we have Elaeagnus umbellata as a support shrub, that's a gumi, and then we have white willow as an emergent tree. Then we have honeyberry. They're producing, look at these guys, already producing a month in. And right, what? It's quite sour, but not too bad. And then the cherry. So planting scheme is a bit wider as well. I mean, there's 3 meters between the fruit trees, but not a ton of things in the middle, because in the UK you have more moisture, so you need a bit more aeration in between. And so you have a fruit tree, support shrub, support emergent tree, fruiting shrub or soft fruit, and another fruit tree. And as a ground cover we have Arctic raspberry, Rubus arcticus, which is a type of blackberry that grows on the ground, low growing, but also very cool loving. And every now and then I see the elm. We had an elm here that we cut down, but it's coming back. I'm not worried about that because I can use it as a replacement for the white willow if the white willow shows that it's slower than the elm. Now the elm is usually a much slower growing plant, but because it's got roots in the ground, whereas this guy was planted very young, he might actually catch up and be ahead of the willow. And in that case I might just cut the willow down again and again until it dies, and then we get actually that as a support shading emergent tree. Every now and then we have black currants instead of honeyberries. There you go, black currants and some white currants, and I think that's it on this row. Oh yes, one important thing is what plants do we have which have a shorter life cycle, like the placenta of this system. We have strawberries on the ground, which will be actually a longer term type of ground cover, a bit like the Rubus arcticus there. And then we have rhubarb. I'm just trying to see, a lot of it has been attacked by slugs, but hopefully they will recover. They were planted from seeds, then transplanted in the ground as plug plants. There we go. So this is rhubarb. Again, nice crop in England, and you can use all the leaves as a mulch, and the stems as a crop, and even the stems you don't use because you don't need as much perhaps the stuff you planted, you can use it as a mulch source. So this is the last agroforestry row. You can see here that when we do the weeding, as I showed you earlier, everything can be put back on top, especially on a dry day. Look at that, the rhubarb in between the wood bits. And that's it all. One last thing I want to show you here is that this system, which is similar to the one you saw with the courgettes earlier, but here it was really weedy ground, no preparation at all. Actually, we had a little bit of subsoiling event here. We just went through with a ripper, subsoiled this ground, lots of weeds, removed a few of the bigger stones, but you can still see there are big stones in there. And then we added a lot of horse manure, and there's some bedding in there as well, so some carbon on top of the nitrogen, etc. And this is all fresh manure, then landscape fabric, holes every 1.5 meters, and squash. This is creeping squash, winter squash. So this will produce a crop while slowing down the weeds. It won't kill the weeds quickly enough. Actually, after the squash, we'll still need to tarp or do something else, but we can't plant into it without taking care of the weeds. But the weeds will be slowed down while we grow a crop, which is an ideal type of strategy. Cool stuff. So I'm going to show you the last bit, which is here along the river. There's nothing really growing here, but I'm going to show you a few ideas that we have. This area gets neglected a little bit. We need to maintain it because it's quite wide. We have quite a large in up points in areas is kind of 4 meters wide, even between where the beds would be or the end of the agroforestry rows is, and the electric fence, which we put here because we're not allowed to put a fixed fence next to the river. We need to leave at least 10 meters from the boundary where the river actually is. So what happens here? What we thought we would do here, because there's a lot of space that would be wasted otherwise. I mean, we're going to need access anyway. We don't need that much space, so we're going to put, probably, I'm not sure yet, we have to decide, but this is an idea we came up with Flavia. We're going to put a row of tall crops, and it could be sunflowers. And so we create shade, because this is very tall. These are very tall trees. There's robinia, black locust. There's a lot of sambucus, elderberry, and there's bay leaf, all plants that really love near the proximity of the river. So if we put something tall here, then we have a corridor which is always in permanent shade, and we can grow mushrooms there. And so Flavia has already put some piopini mushrooms into these poplar logs that we cut down as a pruning material. As in, we pruned poplar, we have these logs, and then they've been inoculated with piopini mushrooms. But the idea could be that we could have a lot of pallets here, also wood chip with King Strofari inoculated with it, and a bit of pallets with that. We could do whatever we want to do essentially, and have a corridor of mushroom production out in the field. That would be amazing. There's the river providing moisture, and there are the trees shading from this side, and there will be a tall crop on this side. And the sun goes behind that hill in the evening, so there's quite a bit of shade in the evening anyway. So it's and obviously in the morning there's no sun at all in this area because the sun is behind the trees next to the river. And finally, well, this is a bit of a nursery. I will tell you about that in a minute. The greenhouse or the polytunnel. Not the best polytunnel actually, but everything is very expensive over here, and also especially aluminium and steel and plastic. So we had to be economical, and we've already invested way more than we expected to, and we would be comfortable too. But at some point, if you're all in, you have to go all in. And now we really have to find a way to get some money in, selling veg, but also organizing events. We'll see. There's lots of things. But anyway, one of these investments was buying this greenhouse. This area is really hard ground. There's stones here. There was like a parking area. No way we could grow in the ground very easily. And so we decided, rather than waste that bit, because we pay rent on this land, we'd put a polytunnel on it. And this was the biggest we could afford. It's not the best because it doesn't have crop bars as they're called. So we need to come up with a solution, which is not the best, but I'll show it to you when we install it for tomato, trellising for tomato string. But anyway, so this is 6 meters wide and 20 meters long. So it's longer than the one we had in the UK, but a little bit narrower. And the idea is that this first area is propagation station, and you see all the trays on the side. We'll add another table here because this is too much wasted space. We have, remember when you buy a greenhouse, you have to make sure that every single bit of it produces money. it pays for itself. Otherwise it costs you money. It costs you money because every now and then you have to replace the plastic, every now and then something happens, and also it costs you to buy it and to put it up as well. So this cost £3,500 if you include the putting up, which was done partly by us and partly by a guy who helped us. So we had to pay somebody to help. But it's it's a bit of money for something like this. With 4,000 we bought a much better one in the UK. Much better in many ways. Like the doors were much better. These doors are really rubbish. Never buy doors like these. Always buy sliding doors. It makes a huge difference, and they don't cost a ton more, but if you're not on a shoestring budget, you should really buy those. So anyway, this table here is a multi-purpose station at the moment. We use it also to process veg, to wash it and pack it, because we don't have a proper wash and pack station yet. You might have seen the bathtub there that's been set up as a table like we had in the UK, but we don't still have a very good system where a very good place where to do that, which is undercover. So I bought a gazebo. We need to put it up and decide where to place. But at the moment, this table can serve both as a sowing station and as a processing station for veg. And then we want to hang. I'm really keen to hang something from there, so that in the summer, especially when we don't need all the light, especially on this side, because things actually would benefit from a bit of shade, we could hang some strawberry planters and have some strawberry production at the top. This second part of this kind of 2/3 of the greenhouse will grow tomatoes, aubergines, basil, and cucumber. And the idea there is that, remember, this is parking space. This is really hard ground, full of stones. I went through with a with a rotavator, in fact with a 2-wheel tractor, very powerful machine, trying to break at least the top compaction, because otherwise it would be like growing on stone. It was very hard going. I mean, literally the thing, even though it's a 13 horsepower machine, it was bouncing back because of the stones it hit. But I managed to break a little bit of compaction at the top, and now we're going to make very raised beds. So we're going to put compost, manure, probably hay, and then plant the tomatoes in there. They will have a nice thick layer to grow into initially, and in time plants and microbes will fix this soil. Even though the stones will remain there, they will make it hospitable to roots, so they can penetrate through that compaction which is present at the back. To give you an idea of how compacted it was to put up all these 40 the feet of these hoops, it took me a full day. There were 2 of us, but most of the hammering was done by me actually. But it really took forever. I'm not the strongest person, but they kept bending. We had a very sophisticated system to make sure that the feet didn't break or didn't deform, so that they could still be usable. But it took so much effort because we kept hitting stones, and it was really hard work. So we had to do pilot holes, break the stones, and then put these in the ground. There's no concrete at any stage in this, but the ground is hard enough, and these are 50 centimeters in the ground, so they'll stay put. The good thing about this greenhouse is that the sides roll up to here. This is aluminium, and so they roll up more than a half, so on each side. That side is very shady anyway, but having airflow across and also with the doors will be really important in the summer here. Already in here it's quite hot. It must be 23, 24 degrees, and it's been cool and shady all day. Now there's a bit of sunshine, fortunately, but the temperatures are going to go up very high in here, and the air flow will be indispensable. Right, so this is the end of the video tour of May. I hope you enjoyed having a look around a new market garden. Please write a comment if there's any ideas that spring to mind, any suggestions, anything that you'd like to see next time, or anything at all. And I hope next time you see the garden there will be lots more crops, lots more things going on, a wash and pack station, and a lot of the veg will have been sold hopefully, and there will be planting in the greenhouse. Lots of things will be going on, and so I will look forward to seeing you in the next video to show you all of that. Cheers, bye bye.